Hello and welcome everyone to the Asia Society Policy Institute's webinar on Re-engagement in Focus, Security, Economics, and the Future of U.S. Pakistan Ties. I'm Farwa Aamer, the Director of South Asia Initiatives here at ASPI in New York. U.S. Pakistan relations have entered a new phase of renewed momentum under the second Trump administration. The past several months have seen a series of noteworthy developments pointing toward a significantly positive reset in bilateral engagement. Back in March, President Trump publicly thanked the government of Pakistan during his joint address to Congress for its assistance in capturing the terrorists responsible for the 2021 Abbey Gate bombings. Then came the India-Pakistan conflict in May, where Pakistan widely praised the president's intervention in helping broker a ceasefire, even going far as to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize, though India denied any claims of U.S. mediation. Amid these exchanges, June brought another striking moment, an unprecedented White House luncheon between President Trump and Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, Field Marshal Asim Munir. Since then, Pakistan has repeatedly underscored the president's role in promoting peace in South Asia, secured a lower tariff rate, and begun exploring new channels of engagement that could take this relationship beyond traditional security-focused cooperation toward a broader partnership grounded in geoeconomics. This emerging chapter was further reinforced just last month when Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, joined by Field Marshal Asim Munir, met with President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington. Not only that, but Prime Minister Sharif was also front and center at the recent Gaza Peace Summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, where he lauded the U.S. president as a man of peace. All looks pretty rosy in this bilateral equation, but there are important questions here. What do these developments mean and signal about Washington's evolving approach toward the region? What lies beneath these optics, and what might the future trajectory of U.S.-Pakistan ties look like? To unpack all this and more, I'm delighted to be joined by a brilliant panel of experts today. We have with us Senator Mushahid Hussain, Pakistan's former Federal Minister of Information and Media Development, Elizabeth Threlkeld, Senior Fellow and Director of the South Asia Program at the Stimson Center, and Uzair Younus, Chief Product Officer, Tag AI at the Asia Group and host of the podcast Pakistonomy. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. I'll start with some questions for our panel on my end, and at about the 45-minute mark, we'll take questions from the audience via the Zoom Q&A box in front of you. So send in your queries there, and we'll try to address as many as possible during our session today. So with that, let's just get started. Uzair, if I may just start with you. We're seeing this remarkable shift in U.S.-Pakistan relations compared to the cool distance of the Biden years. Pakistan appears to be firmly back on Washington's policy radar. There is visible personal chemistry at the leadership level, and clearly a convergence of strategic interests are at play. From your vantage point sitting in Washington, what are the main forces driving this renewed engagement? And which of these forces do you see as the most consequential or potentially the most fragile in shaping where the relationship goes on next? Over to you, Uzair.
Thank you, Farwa, for having me. I think, look, from the perspective of the Pakistan-America relationship and the points of views of interlocutors in Pakistan, there is a consensus view that the Biden years perhaps were sort of a near low point, a historic low point in the relationship for all sorts of reasons, key among them being the fact that many in the administration at that time viewed that Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, where the exit happened in Kabul in a way that perhaps is remembered along with Vietnam as something the country wants to forget, was a key sort of thing that they remember as evidence that Pakistan cannot be trusted. And Pakistan is a country that has to be managed when crises happen, but the relationship does not need to be deepened. That perspective was reinforced within the administration by this view that bringing India closer and looking at the interests of the India-US relationship was critical for America's role in the region moving forward, particularly in terms of balancing against China. And if that meant right-sizing or downsizing the relationship with Pakistan to build trust with New Delhi, then that was actually an easy policy choice for the Biden administration. Having said that, there were many within the American foreign policy system who were arguing for a bit of a different approach, but they were not being listened to. There were three key pillars of those who argued for a different approach towards Pakistan. The first was that post-American withdrawal from Afghanistan, there was still value to be offered by the Pakistanis when it came to counter-terror operations and cooperation, particularly as it related to ISIS Khorasan, and something that could yield near-term wins for both countries as part of a win-win outcome on counter-terror cooperation. The second was that in Balochistan, where the Chinese had made dramatic developments, particularly via the Gwadar port, there were still opportunities for the West and for the United States to compete. And there it was important to look at things a bit differently. And if you recall, and many of your audiences will recall, the U.S. ambassador at that time, Ambassador Bloom, made a visit to Gwadar even and gave a speech there talking about economic cooperation between the two countries. And that was a signal by the Pakistanis that they were willing to engage with America when it came to economic cooperation in Balochistan as well. And then finally, as the war in Gaza dragged on and the pathway towards peace was being discussed there, Pakistan viewed, and some in the administration at that time viewed, that there were opportunities to be had by bringing Pakistan into the fold via CENTCOM and through its relationship with Saudi Arabia in particular into what comes next in the Middle East. When Donald Trump entered the White House, all of those three things were on the table, and it began with the Abbey Gate operation. And that really showcased a delivery on a thing that President Trump deeply cared about, something he had spoken about on the campaign trail, something his inner circle cared about. And when the Pakistanis delivered on that operation, things opened up in terms of looking at Pakistan from a different lens, a very dramatically different lens from the Biden administration itself. That began the conversation between Pakistan and Washington on a whole host of things, key among them being critical minerals, on which a lot of work had already been done in terms of the settlement of the case with Barrick Mining, a Canadian company, which has recently talked about a G7 financing package for the Reko Diq mine. The ADB is financing it, the IFC is financing it. There are reports that perhaps DFC, the United States' financing arm, may also take a stake or provide some level of financing. So that was a critical evolution of that. And then, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was in Sharm el-Sheikh, and Pakistan signed a strategic defense agreement with Saudi Arabia. And that really anchors, from my perspective, Pakistan as a net security provider in the Middle Eastern region, something the United States has been encouraging for a while now, as far as I know. And so those are the main drivers. But I'll conclude by saying one thing is important here to flag, and I don't think it's been appreciated as much in the South Asia community in Washington as it should be, which is that all of these recalculations about Pakistan are directly an outcome of what happened in the conflict with India. Wars have consequences. And this idea in Washington that Pakistan was a near bankrupt state with a military that was divided and incapable of fighting was proven wrong when Pakistan was able to not only defend its skies, but compete and go toe-to-toe with India. And that led to not only a reassessment within the White House about Pakistan's military capabilities and what it brought to the table, but a reassessment globally, including in the Middle East. And I think we must recognize that shift that happened in terms of Pakistan's standing as a direct consequence of the country's performance in the conflict with India, particularly its Air Force, because in the period of time that we live in today, defending one's skies is key to defending one's sovereignty. And the fact that the Pakistanis were able to do that in a largely effective manner led to a reconsideration about the value proposition Pakistan brings to the table and its kinetic and geopolitical heft, particularly in the region.
Thank you so much, Uzair, for setting the scene for us. And you raised a couple of very important points. One is, of course, the reassessment of the military capabilities following the conflict between India and Pakistan, and looking at Pakistan in a different perspective, the agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan on defense, but also critical minerals, which I'd love to go deeper into with you later. But it's a perfect seg since you brought in the India policy that Washington's been focusing on. I want to move to Elizabeth now. Elizabeth, if we zoom out to the regional picture, for previous administrations, as Uzair pointed, India has been sort of the cornerstone of Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy, a choice partner in the region seen largely as a key counterweight to China. Yet we are now watching this curious divergence that we've talked about. The U.S. Pakistan ties are warming just as friction is growing with New Delhi over trade and energy imports from Russia. How do you read Washington's evolving South Asia policy here? Zaire just talked about the May India-Pakistan conflict and how that led to sort of Washington seeing Pakistan differently as a force that is able to defend itself. But how has it contributed to the evolution of the South Asia policy from your perspective as well? And the friendlier U.S. tone with Islamabad is definitely something that New Delhi is watching, how it might be prompting India to rethink its own regional and global positioning. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you so much, Farwa, for convening us this morning and for having me. So I think this is, in some ways, the key question that we look at going forward in trying to kind of gaze into our crystal ball and see where things are headed in South Asia. And I think a little bit of humility is in order here, certainly from my perspective, and I think for many analysts here in DC. These shifts have come as a bit of a surprise. Looking back on the early days of the Trump administration, I think there was an expectation that we would see effectively a continuation of the same tone and tenor of the U.S.-India relationship, perhaps even without some of the friction points that had quietly emerged under the Biden administration over things like human rights and democracy concerns. Looking back now, I think we can identify a few drivers of what did ultimately shift in that relationship, some of which Uzair referred to, and you did as well in your question. I think certainly the trade dispute is a key issue here, and the lack of ability of the U.S. and India to reach an initial trade deal that many had expected was coming. There was a draft deal that was on the table and didn't meet with President Trump's expectations. There's also the frustrations over India's continued purchases of Russian oil. And that is back in the news today with the U.S. decision to sanction two of Russia's major oil producers. And we are seeing signs, quiet reporting at least from Indian media, that India will be pulling back from its Russian oil purchases, Reliance in particular, just this morning. There was some reporting along those lines. We can also see immigration issues, right? As this administration in the U.S. has taken a harder line with this kind of America First framing, the H-1B issue is certainly something that has emerged as a point of friction in the relationship. And so with all of those, I think it is possible to imagine that as India reduces its purchases of Russian oil, if we are able to reach some sort of trade agreement, there was some expectation that might happen at the ASEAN summit, but now Prime Minister Modi has just announced that he's going to be attending virtually, which precludes any sort of Trump-Modi meeting and likely an announcement there. But nonetheless, there's the possibility that we will see a trade deal in the near term. And similarly, that immigration issues might be able to be managed, right? So that could see us back on somewhat firmer footing in the bilateral relationship. But I think that doesn't get to the crisis element. And that is sometimes underappreciated by more traditional analysts who focus exclusively on the U.S.-India relationship, because I think I agree, it did play a key role, and it remains a point of friction in the relationship. President Trump continues to bring up the conflict risk between India and Pakistan, including, he mentioned in an Oval Office briefing just earlier this week, or press availability, that he had encouraged India not to go to war with Pakistan. So this isn't something that seems to be dying down, and it's a key point of friction domestically within India, and a source of concern for Prime Minister Modi to have this keep coming up. It's a point of great sensitivity. And so I think managing that going forward is likely to be quite challenging. The last thing I'll say, though, is we're still really waiting in many ways to see what the U.S.-China policy is going to be. And I think that is a factor here that we can't ignore. If Washington does take a harder line against Beijing, that could reignite some of the undergirdings of the U.S.-India relationship that we had seen over the past several administrations, including the first Trump administration, and could actually close some of the space that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has been enjoying recently. So not to end on an it's too soon to tell, but I do think there are a number of variables here that haven't quite landed.
No, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for painting a broader picture here for what's happening in the region, particularly from a U.S.-India perspective, but also what is going to be the U.S.-China policy. We know there is an expected meeting between President Trump and President Xi, but it's a perfect segue to my next question to Senator Mushahid Hussain, where we are talking a lot about Washington and Islamabad coming closer, and Washington's regaining importance, both in terms of how it's Islamabad's looking at it from an economic perspective. There's always been hopes for a reset under the second Trump administration, but there's a deep partnership with Beijing here, which remains a cornerstone of Islamabad's foreign policy. When, as Elizabeth mentioned, if the U.S.-China rivalry intensifies and, these trade frictions that we're seeing, China's export restrictions on rare earths, all are sort of complicating the picture between U.S. and China. So against this backdrop, how do you see Pakistan navigating this increasingly fraught and volatile strategic competition? Can Islamabad realistically balance both relationships, one with the US, one with China, without inviting pressure from either side, or will it be eventually forced to choose? Over to you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Farwa. It's always a pleasure to be with the Asian Society Policy Institute seminars, which are quite riveting because they discuss issues that matter to us in this very important part of the world. So, and my greetings to my fellow panelists and those who are listening. My own view is that the US-China rivalry will not intensify. I think that Pakistanis read Trump right, because Trump is not ideological when it comes to China. He's not obsessed by China as Biden or Obama were. And that is why there has been a qualitative change in the US-India relationship also. And that is also one of the reasons why there's been outreach to Pakistan. And I expect that Trump has realized he's lost the tariff and trade war with China. He's not a Cold Warrior. He doesn't want a new Cold War with China. And from what I've been reading about the outlines and contours of his upcoming national security strategy, that is also shifting gears. It's no longer the focus on Indo-Pacific strategy, which made India the larger than size role to confront China. He's focusing on homeland security. He's focusing on the Western Hemisphere. So I expect that there'll be a thaw in China-US relations. The Chinese are ready for that. They were ready for the confrontation trade war, and that's why I think Trump has realized that he can't win this with China, because China is already quite advanced in issues of technology, climate change, and also rare earth materials. So I think that perhaps when they meet in Seoul, there will be a thaw, and next year you'll expect Trump in China and Xi Jinping in the United States. So this will not come to that. And also, I think that I agree with Uzair also that the assessment in Washington from the Trump team is very clear, that the role that had been previously assigned to India, and India was being really mollycoddled and by the Biden administration, by the Trump administration, by the Obama administration, and being really propped up to take on China. And I think that role, they've gone down a few notches after the thrashing, if I may use the term, that they got from Pakistan in that brief encounter in May. And Trump has reinforced that narrative very repeatedly, much to India's chagrin and detriment. So given that context, I see, I think, some positive changes. And Trump, we also are very clear, our relationship with China has always been strategic, solid, and substantive. We know Trump is there for 3 years. It's basically tactical and transactional. Fine. Trump is interested in what I call the 3 Cs: crypto, critical minerals, and counterterrorism. And on that, we are willing to give that cooperation, and I don't see any fundamental even conflict of interest with China vis-a-vis the United States in South Asia. So Pakistan has always wanted a relationship which is focusing more on economic interaction and trade, and that's what Trump is offering. So, and by the way, as you know, I was one of the few ones in Pakistan who had predicted that Trump will win the election and that Trump would be good for Pakistan and the region. And I'm happy to say that because Trump is different than most American presidents. And he's probably the first American president after JFK who is not part of the American traditional security establishment playbook or from the deep state. So I think that it's a refreshing thing. And that's why he has been able to rein in Netanyahu. He's having an outreach with Putin. He even wants an outreach with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And according to my reports, and we have been acting as a very positive back channel between Tehran and Washington, he even wants to deal with the Iranians on the nuclear issue. So I think that would be good for regional peace and security and stability. And that kind of approach, rather than a purely militaristic Cold War approach based on searching for new enemies and trying to chase shadows where you can't. And I see that the U.S.-China arrangement will probably be reached sooner than later. Probably in the next 6 months to a year.
And thank you, Senator. So there's always this plausibility that while you could have more tensions within the U.S.-China dynamic, there is a softer U.S. stance towards China, which reduces the weight of India as a counterweight in Washington's strategic calculus, and then allows Pakistan to keep walking this tightrope of balance, which it has so far mastered with years of being able to keep a relationship with both sides, even during the slight ambivalence in the past 4 years under the Biden administration. But you also brought up Tehran, and we would love to go into that as well with you later in the session. But the 3 Cs, and one of them, critical minerals. Uzair, just coming back to you on that, you talked about it earlier as well. Their critical minerals are framed as the new oil of the 21st century, and Pakistan has entered Washington's radar precisely at a time when the US is trying more than ever to diversify a bit from Chinese-dominated supply chains. It's a conscious effort. It's sort of like the way to Washington's heart right now, as we saw during the meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Albanese as well. There was a rare earth critical minerals agreement. So talk to us a little bit more about how credible is Pakistan's proposition in this space in terms of proven reserves, investment readiness, and regulatory predictability. Is this where Pakistan could finally anchor a geoeconomic relationship with Washington, as it's largely reporting and hoping to, rather than purely a security-driven one that we've seen over the years? Also, President Trump had mentioned developing massive oil reserves in Pakistan. What does the future of that look like? So over to you, Uzair.
I'll build on something that Senator Saab had said about the U.S.-China rivalry and where things go. And even if one takes a counter view or a contrarian view to what Senator Saab was saying, let's assume the rivalry sharpens. Even in that case, my view is that Pakistan and West Asia writ large will remain and is likely to remain an area of strategic convergence and not divergence between the United States and China. The reason for that is as follows. I'll connect this to critical minerals in just a moment as well. The Chinese are the largest buyers of energy from the Middle East. And so they have an intrinsic interest in securing energy supply lines and maintaining some level of peace and stability in the region. If Pakistan plays a role in enabling that with a larger American security umbrella that the Americans are already providing, that's good for the Chinese. And as part of that arrangement, if Pakistan gets access to financing and some level of economic support from Saudi Arabia and other partners, then part of the economic stability that Pakistan will have as a result of that will lead to greater demand for Chinese solar panels, Chinese batteries, Chinese next generation defense platforms, etc. So that's good for China. Low energy prices are good for both Pakistan and China as well. And if the United States starts investing in Balochistan, then the economic viability of a lot of the infrastructure projects the Chinese have invested in Pakistan, including Gwadar, goes up that much higher. that is also good for Pakistan. If the United States also plays a role in Balochistan and critical minerals, through which the security situation on counter-terror operations with groups like the BLA, which the United States has now declared as a foreign terror organization, if that situation improves, that's also good for the Chinese, because in recent years, the BLA has been targeting primarily Chinese citizens, investors, and engineers. So my view is, regardless of where the US-China rivalry goes, West Asia, Balochistan, and the Middle East will remain an area of convergence, not divergence, between these two great powers. Now, this is where the Pakistani opportunity on critical minerals really presents itself in terms of deepening the US-Pakistan relationship. Because what the US wants is to ensure that there is some level of competition over the coming years on access to these critical minerals all over the world, not just in Pakistan, with China, and that the Chinese dominance is eroded over time. Pakistan in Reko Diq has one of the world's largest undeveloped gold and copper reserves left on the table, and they are owned by a Canadian company, which Canada happens to be part of the Five Eyes, so that is good for the West, and by extension, good for America. If that project materializes and starts moving forward, an entire vertically integrated critical minerals and mining refinery ecosystem can be developed on the coast of Pakistan, which can provide an alternative supply chain to the West and to the rest of the world that is good for business for everybody. And I think this is where the opportunity for Pakistan lies. And so far, they are doing the grunt work and the hard yards on making this possible. Note that the Reko Diq settlement happened under the previous Army Chief General Bajwa and the previous Prime Minister Imran Khan, and a lot of hard work was put in at that time, parts of it done in a way which I at that time criticized in terms of the process. But having said that, they've delivered on a lot of the promises that have been made. Now the ball is in Pakistan's court to continue progressing on this vision and continuing to slowly but surely make operational the investments that have been declared at this point in time. That includes pushing through ease of doing business reforms, improving the security situation in Balochistan, making Gwadar Port much more feasible from an economic and operational standpoint. And by the way, the biggest challenge here, solving the energy crisis in Balochistan as a province, which still has insecure access to reliable energy. But so far, the strategy on the Pakistani side has been to bring the West into the fold in Balochistan. So in Reko Diq, Canadian company Barrick Mining is giving equipment licenses or equipment contracts to Matsu, a Japanese company. 3 out of the 4 locations where this equipment will be manufactured happen to be in Republican America. So that's good for America and the president's constituencies in particular. A Finnish company will be providing a 200 megawatt power plant to make the mine operational as well. The ADB will finance it, the IFC will finance it, and probably the DFC will finance it. So this is a G7 involvement in one of the world's largest copper and gold mines. There are other assets that will get played up in the coming year, but I think Reko Diq is the epicenter of this vision, and it has to deliver first and foremost before anything else moves forward. On the diplomatic side, the Pakistanis have also played this up masterfully. So you mentioned the meeting that Shehbaz Sharif and Asim Munir had with Donald Trump. There's a very great picture on the White House's website from that event where a box of rare earth minerals is being delivered to the president. Masterful diplomacy from my perspective to show the evidence to the president of something he cares about and his team cares about as well. On the oil reserves, I think there's a lot of, for now, wishful thinking. Having said that, the surveys do suggest that Pakistan does have untapped reserves here, but they will require a lot of investment that needs to be materialized through private and public investments, particularly from Western operators. The environment in Pakistan on the economic side is not there yet. That doesn't mean it cannot get there. And so my view is Pakistan's focus should remain here on operationalizing Reko Diq first and foremost, and then taking baby steps from there by bringing in the Saudis, bringing in the Qataris, trying to push through reforms slowly and surely, and sort of start crawling, walking, and then running. And I think if the Pakistanis do this right, which so far they're taking the right steps, then this geoeconomic relationship with the West that is anchored around critical minerals, which are going to be relevant for the next 50 plus years in the global economy, will truly transform Pakistan's relationship with America and the Western countries.
Thank you, Zair, for laying that out for us, Reengagement being the critical component here for delivery as far as Pakistan is concerned, and masterful diplomacy, you said, in terms of actually showing the evidence when you meet with the president from Pakistan's side that, yes, we do have these reserves. But I do want to prompt one more thing here, which is the Pasni port, which it was a reported pitch as a part of this conversation or sort of other back channel communications. What is this Pasni port prospect? Do you foresee a U.S. investment coming in? And that could complicate the shoreline with being so close to Gwadar.
I think it's a long way to go there. That report was speculative in a way. There might be private sector plans to operationalize Pasni. And if you look at from a statistical and economic perspective, a country of 250 million people ought to have more than two port cities. That's my view. And I think the evidence from East Asia, Eastern Seaboard of China, Eastern Seaboard of United States, even the seaports of India is evidence that if you need to grow in the 20th and 21st century, you have to have port cities that are vibrant and economically viable. So if Pasni gets developed down the road, that's great. But I think for now, Pakistan should, again, my view is focus on Gwadar, making Gwadar much more economically feasible, looking at a seafood exporting business line over there, looking at rare earth processing capacities over there, looking at the energy and water challenges of the port, and also looking at Karachi as a port city that needs a lot of infrastructure investment as well. And so once that starts going in the right direction, obviously Pakistan will need a lot more port capacity and Pasni may become viable down the road. But for now, it's a red herring. And I think it's important for policymakers, both in Washington and in Islamabad, to focus on the here and now and sort of get some runs on the board to show some signs of progress.
Perfect. Thank you, Zair. So short-term ROI with long-term vision is something that could go hand in hand if the right policy making is in place. But I want to come to you, Elizabeth, once again. We talked about one conflict in the region, which was India and Pakistan, but there's another one, which is Pakistan and Afghanistan, which continues to cast a shadow over regional stability. You saw the recent flare-ups along the Afghan-Pakistan border, coupled with Islamabad's repeated accusations of Taliban's support for the TTP, which all have revived old security concerns and the risks of future conflicts there. With President Trump signaling an interest in regaining some U.S. footprint in the region, such as the Bagram Air Base, which has been indirectly opposed by regional stakeholders, how do you see Washington approaching Afghanistan if tensions between Kabul and Islamabad escalate again? And how might a deepening Afghanistan-India connection, the interim Foreign Minister Mutaki was in Delhi for 6 days or so. How does that India-Afghanistan connection complicate this calculus? And of course, China is an important player in this dynamic as well. So over to you, Elizabeth, for your thoughts.
Yeah, it's an important question, Farwa. I think looking at what the Trump administration has been doing and not doing in Afghanistan so far, it seems to suggest that the focus has been on two things, really. So one is detainees, the U.S. detainees that are being held by the Taliban. We've seen multiple rounds of negotiations seeking to win their release, some of which have been successful, as well as quiet CT cooperation that continues, albeit through not public channels. And so with that, yes, we do occasionally hear mentions of Bagram, coming from the president. And so we certainly can't dismiss that. But I'm not necessarily for now in my analysis factoring that in as a real meaningful signal that we're seeing the U.S. looking to get reinvested in Afghanistan and doing the work that it would take to actually regain a footing on the map in Afghanistan. Of course, that could change depending on how things play out, but it hasn't been something that I think we've seen other signs of. Now, coming to the question you asked in terms of how the Pakistan-Afghanistan tensions that have broken out over the past month or so factor into this. President Trump did briefly allude to the escalation, but basically said, "I've got a long to-do list, and we'll have to save it until when I get back to Washington." And then we really saw Qatar and Turkey play the leading role in bringing the two sides to the table and reaching the ceasefire over the past weekend. And so certainly, if that holds, it is possible to imagine the U.S., playing a supportive role behind the scenes. But what we have seen from President Trump is really an inclination to play the mediation role, play the peacemaker role, and a lack of interest in any sort of escalation. And so in this case, it's quite interesting because Pakistan is on the receiving end of proxy attacks through the TTP. Pakistan is frustrated that Afghanistan is giving safe haven. And so it's actually Pakistan that's the one that is carrying out the kinetic strikes into Afghanistan in this broader context. And so I think reading how the White House thus far has responded and really kind of letting regional actors play a key role here, I would imagine that would continue. It is, though, important to think about the counterterrorism implications of what is playing out. The Biden administration did not prioritize the TTP as a key actor that was of greatest concern. I think the read was that the TTP was unlikely to carry out attacks beyond kind of the immediate region versus ISK, which obviously, as Uzair was mentioning, has been a focus. And so if things worsen further in terms of the CT challenges along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, that could reopen conversations about what potential deeper U.S. Pakistan CT cooperation could look like in a way that, could recall some of the discussions that were happening 10, 15 years ago, albeit in a very different context when the U.S. does not have 100,000 troops across the border in Afghanistan. And so, I see not too many signs that things are going to really deepen in terms of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan right now. But as ever, this is a very fluid region, and it's worth keeping an eye on.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just a reminder for everyone, we will take questions in about 5 minutes or so. So please, if you have any questions, please put them in the Zoom Q&A function and we'll try to get to them. Senator, just coming back to you, we're talking about the wider region right now. We discussed the mutual defense agreement with Saudi Arabia briefly, the role that Pakistan visibly played in sort of the Gaza peace process, being part of those discussions, the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit, along with other key actors of the Muslim world. But there's something that you mentioned, which was Tehran. And President Trump himself had commented during the Iran-Israel tensions that Pakistan knows Iran better than most, which reflects Washington's recognition of Islamabad's regional relevance. Uzair also mentioned that West Asia, this region at large, is going to be a point of convergence from his perspective between the two great powers, US and China. So taken together, all of these developments that we're seeing, first, could you talk to us a little bit about the Tehran connection here and how does that play in the U.S.-Pakistan engagement? And also, as Pakistan seeks a broader security and diplomatic role, Uzair mentioned, Pakistan being the net security provider here in the Middle East and within the Muslim world, could Pakistan's expanding engagement contribute to more complexities in many ways, while we're largely seeing signs of it being the contributor towards greater regional stability? But could there be more complexities as we go forward in managing U.S. interests, given the volatility of the foreign policy that we're experiencing on the daily here? So over to you, Senator, for your thoughts.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the Pakistan-Saudi Defense Agreement, and I want to let you know that we are the first think tank in Pakistan, my think tank, which published this report on Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, Muslim world strategic security partners. And I can send you a soft copy of that. So we have been focusing on this issue because we published it. We were the first in Pakistan to do so. And Pakistan has had a track record of quite deep military and strategic involvement in the Muslim countries of the Middle East. And right now, you can see there are five major capitals, and which may have different policies: Riyadh, Tehran, Beijing, Moscow, Washington, D.C. In all of these five, concurrently, Pakistan has ingress, impact, influence, and a kind of trust and confidence at the highest political levels, respectively. So I think that's quite a unique position. And starting with the Iran first, I think Pakistan was one country which gave full support to Iran. It's a neighboring country. And I believe that a substantial part of the conversation that President Trump had with the Field Marshal Asim Munir in June over lunch was also about Iran. He wanted to listen. Trump wanted to listen and learn about Iran because he's very unconventional. He doesn't follow the traditional State Department files because Pakistanis are next door to Iran. And he himself said Pakistanis know more about Iran than others do. So we gave our readout, and our view was that this war, if it expands between Israel and Iran, is going to be destabilizing, and the regime change would be devastating, and it would rock the region in a way that it hasn't been rocked for the last 4 decades. So I think that better sense prevailed, and Trump advice was also because, and also we have this. You're talking of Israel's border almost being next to Pakistan, and given the Indian-Israeli axis, that would be a nightmare for our policymakers and strategists. So thank God that that has not happened, and Iran also held its own, did very well, and I think Israelis, like the Indians, ran to Trump for a ceasefire. So on that regard, also, I feel that the vibes we are getting from Tehran are that the Iranians are also very keen for a deal with the United States on terms of equality. And I was recently talking to some Iranian friends, including the Iranian ambassador in Pakistan, and he was saying that 2 countries supported Iran in this conflict with Israel. One was Pakistan, and they thanked Pakistan publicly. And the other country he mentioned was Saudi Arabia. And I said, Ambassador, how come Saudi Arabia? And this is because the Chinese had arranged the Iran-Saudi rapprochement in 2023. And that has worked. And if you remember, people don't perhaps have forgotten, just before the war started in April 2025, King Salman of Saudi Arabia sent his younger son, KBS, Khalid bin Salman, who is the younger brother of MBS, as a special envoy. He met the supreme leader of Iran, and he conveyed 2-3 important messages. Number one, that Saudi Arabia now supports an Iran-American nuclear deal, which they had opposed in the Obama administration. So they said this is good for that because Iran has announced very clearly they're not building the bomb. And I think they mean it because there's also a religious edict, a fatwa from the supreme leader on that this is violation of Islamic norms. Secondly, they said that if there's a war, an attack on Iran, Saudi Arabia would oppose it, and Saudi Arabia would not be party to that aggression against Iran. So that was very significant. And the third thing the Saudis conveyed to the supreme leader in that letter from King Salman, according to my sources, is that they said that unless and until there's a Palestinian state established with Jerusalem as its capital, they will not normalize relations with Israel, the Saudis, that is. So that way, there's a greater convergence of interest between Iran and Saudi Arabia and also Pakistan. And coming to the Pakistan-Saudi defense deal, because, there's a vacuum created after what happened to Qatar, where the U.S. could not stop the Israeli aggression. And before that, as you know, there was this famous oil for security understanding between the Arab oil-rich regimes and Washington, where uninterrupted supply of energy to Washington would be provided and in return, the U.S. would provide for the security and safety and stability. And that has not happened. So that's why I think that they saw Pakistan as a net security provider. And if you remember in the Qatar World Cup, it was the Pakistan Army which provided security for the Qatar World Cup. And Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have an agreement on defense dating back to 1982, and we had stationed our troops there also. And so Pakistan has a track record of being involved with military involvement with Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Libya, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain. And so training missions, troop deployments, and Pakistan is seen as a reliable country which is non-Arab and which does not have any ideological or political agenda of its own other than being part of the Muslim camaraderie. So Pakistan is in a good position to play that role. And after what has happened in May, where we have shown that we can hold our own against India and also take them on. So that shows that Pakistan has that capability. And we are now emerging as a major Muslim middle power, which can also be a net security provider for some of the Muslim countries that need it. And as you know, Qatar already has 3,000 Turkish troops and half a squadron of F-16s, Turkish F-16s on its soil for the last 3 years. So this is a new pattern, and already Egypt and Turkey are talking about that. And there's defense production plans between Egypt, which has, and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and Indonesia, because Turkey is developing the KAAM fighter jets. So there's a lot of bilateral and multilateral defense cooperation taking place. And you would also recall finally that in the conflict of Azerbaijan and Armenia, it was Pakistan and Turkey which played the decisive role in support of Azerbaijan. And so there's a new troika there also in the Caucasus, Pakistan, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. So a whole lot of things are happening because the US has not played the kind of role that was expected. And that reliability factor is a question mark now. And also given Israel's very aggressive talk of greater Israel, expansionism, and the attacks on not just Palestine and Gaza, but on Lebanon and on Syria, on Iran and Qatar. So I think that there's a reassessment and re-evaluation taking place. And Pakistan fits the bill, so to speak, in that context, security-wise, politically, and diplomatically also.
Thank you, Senator. Just moving on to our questions here, and if I may just stay with you, since you talked about these bilateral and trilateral defense cooperation mechanisms, agreements. There's one question about the implications of increased defense cooperation between Pakistan and Bangladesh. And those two countries have seen some warming of ties, especially since the past 1 year, since the ouster of Sheikh Hasina. How do you see this potential alliance shaping up in the region, in the South Asia region?
I think we should also look at South Asia. I think South Asia has been politically reshaped in the last couple of years. And it was seen to be India's natural abode, their front yard, so to speak, where they could dominate those smaller countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Maldives. But I think the ground realities have shifted. And in Bangladesh, there was a student revolution. There was a very rapidly pro-Indian regime, which was overthrown by the people of Bangladesh. And now there's a trilateral, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and China. And our relations are very good. And if you see the tea leaves, in September, there were elections to the Dhaka University Students' Union, which is a bellwether for the overall national political scene. And the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a right-wing party banned by Hasina Wajid's regime, they swept the polls. They won 23 out of 28 seats. And the forthcoming elections are coming in February. And by the way, I'm going to be an election observer there also. And inshallah, in February. I used to study in Dhaka and speak a bit of Bengali also. Because I was a young student those days. And I think that those parties are likely to come to power, which are going to be very positive and friendly towards Pakistan, towards China, towards the region. So I think the region is being reshaped. In Sri Lanka, you have a leftist government. In Nepal, there's been a popular uprising by the Generation Z against corruption. And in Maldives, the government of President Moise last year, they won the election on one platform, India out of Maldives. So I think that India really needs to reassess its relations with the region. And this Pakistan-Bangladesh relationship is, I think, homecoming of sorts for both, because it's like a family reunion. And we would like to take it forward. And so far, the interactions between our leadership has been quite positive. And we've got a good response. And similarly, from Pakistani side also, there's a willingness to have this kind of new relationship. So a new kind of South Asia is taking a firm shape also, minus SAARC. Unfortunately, SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, the regional body which knit the region together, thanks to India's obduracy and obstinacy. And since 2016, they have vetoed any meetings of SARC at the summit level. So SARC is more or less a stillborn baby now, and other organizations are emerging like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and perhaps maybe one or two new regional organizations may be in the offing. Let's see how the situation shapes up. But I think that this is an assertion of South Asian smaller countries' sovereignty, and I think at the popular will of the people, which has expressed itself in Bangladesh, and we welcome that.
Thank you so much, Senator. We also have comments complimenting your Bangla. It's immaculate, as they say. Elizabeth, just coming over to you, this is it's not to put you on the spot here, but there's a question regarding whether there will be an official visit of President Trump to Pakistan in 2026. I mean, we're still waiting to see if the president will go to India for the Quad Summit this year. But do you foresee a visit to Islamabad coming soon? But also, with regards to going back and we're discussing the U.S.-India policy, we're discussing the U.S.-Pakistan policy. I personally think that you talked about the trade agreement. It's not too far. We're seeing reports of it being finalized. Once the trade agreement is finalized and there is reduction in Russian oil imports from India's side, or at least the gradual promise of it, I see the relationship bouncing back, though there'll be some trust deficit and they'll have to work their way through that. But it wouldn't necessarily undercut the visibility that Pakistan has in Washington at the moment. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Farwa. Great questions. I will say I am not optimistic about the Quad Summit, at least at this point. I don't think the signs are terribly positive there. But I do remain hopeful that the U.S.-India relationship will find a way back to more solid ground. I think there's been a lot invested on both sides, and mutual benefits. It's important that that relationship is grounded in realistic expectations. I think sometimes, particularly to the extent that the defense and security focus under the Indo-Pacific strategy in some ways dominated that relationship. Perhaps there were some outsized expectations about the role that India would or would not play in the event of a contingency involving China. But if you take that off the table, or at least lessen its importance in the overall scope of the relationship, I think there's still a lot that both sides can do together. And to your question, this might be a really interesting opportunity to test out whether Washington is able to have robust, meaningful relationships with both Islamabad and Delhi simultaneously. And for a variety of different reasons, geopolitical and other, that really hasn't been something that we've seen in quite this way in recent years. But I do think it's something to work for. And there is no reason in theory that can't be a possibility, though obviously we shouldn't minimize the role that tensions and frustrations between India and Pakistan play. And with that, I think it's really important to watch the role that the incoming ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, is likely to play, because he's wearing two hats, which is quite unusual. He's going to be the ambassador to India, but he's also going to be a regional envoy. And I think it's the regional envoy role, particularly given the fact that he'll be based in Delhi, that I will be watching very keenly. What will he use that role for? We've already seen him meet, for example, with leaders of Bangladesh. And so it's clear that he's sending signals he wants to be actively involved. And that could actually be something that plays to Delhi's advantage in some way, because he will be based there. But I think it is a different dynamic, and one that is worth keeping an eye on to gauge how this administration is likely to move forward in the region. I'm not holding my breath for a presidential visit. Never say never, of course, but I think it's actually Ambassador Gore's role that will be more decisive here in charting a course ahead.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we'll be watching what Ambassador Gore's next steps would be, not only just as the ambassador to India, but as you said, wearing two hats as a special envoy for South and Central Asia and connecting those regions. You're looking at a very wide portfolio for him. Uzair, if I may come back to you, there's this question again and again about the transactional model and sort of this narrow relationship between US and Pakistan. There's one component that we didn't unpack all that much. That was the crypto aspect. You touched upon it, a nascent player in this field. Talk to us about what the crypto cooperation potential is, the beginnings of it, and where do you see that going? Because Pakistan's putting a lot of force behind that.
Yeah, and there are a few questions on this transactional versus strategic thing. So let me tackle that first and then come to crypto and connect the dots there. Look, the United States moving forward, and this administration has been clearer than most or any recent administration, that the days of U.S. strategic altruism are over, whether it's about NATO and Europe, whether it's about Japan and South Korea, whether it is about the Middle East, or whether it is about Pakistan or anybody else. The days of America writing free checks to everybody are done. And so moving forward, America will have a more and more transactional relationship with other countries, including its allies and partners, where it will expect them to bear a bigger and bigger burden for meeting their own security needs. And Uncle Sam is happy to provide the defense equipment, diplomatic cover, institutional support, financing access as and when needed, but it is not going to follow a policy of strategic altruism. And for Pakistan, it remains the same as well. And I agree with what Senator Saab earlier said about this being a 3-year tactical transactional period for Pakistan, and that's fine. And that's how the world is working right now. And Pakistan will continue to operate on that posture as well. As far as crypto is concerned, again, I think it's taken a life of its own, particularly given some of the coverage and commentary from some of our friends on the left here in Washington, talking about crypto as being this all-corrupting influence over American diplomacy and American foreign policy. And I think that play is exaggerated. And some of that play has been talked about in the context of Pakistan as well, where Zach Witkoff, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's son, was in Pakistan talking about crypto deals, and that has been spun up as something that is evidence of how the generals in Pakistan have corrupted Washington's foreign policy and made it pro-Pakistan just by dazzling the leaders or their sons with crypto opportunities. I think that's preposterous as a statement. What is the opportunity in Pakistan around crypto is that for the last 4 to 5 years, given the economic crisis in Pakistan, younger Pakistanis have flocked to alternative investments, particularly in Bitcoin and other crypto assets, purely as a hedge against the declining value of the rupee. And that began a number of years ago when I was at the Atlantic Council. We even published a report on the crypto and Web3 opportunity for Pakistan at that time. And that opportunity is real because crypto adoption is high. Younger Pakistanis are naturally familiar with that technology. And there's a lot of transactional volume that is occurring in Pakistan for the purchase and sales of crypto assets, especially Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a few big ones as well. That means that for American investors, there's an opportunity here to have verified registered entities operating in Pakistan as crypto exchanges. That makes business sense. And that is something the Pakistanis are keenly trying to pursue on the policy front by enacting the Virtual Digital Assets Authority. Bilal bin Saqib has met with counterparts in Washington with the Trump administration on this. They've even put out a policy change that says if you are registered in the West as an exchange company, Singapore, Europe, America, Canada, etc., then you will be seen as given preferable treatment on the regulatory side because you already are following best practices on access to KYC norms, anti-money laundering, etc. So I think that's the crypto opportunity here. It's a purely economic opportunity for exchanges in the West to look at Pakistan, a country of 250 million people, majority of which is under 35 years of age, that has one of the world's highest rates of crypto adoption, to come here and formally participate in a vibrant market economy where younger people in particular, are into crypto, they trade and buy and follow crypto, and in fact are launching projects around the world on this on these technologies. An example, and I'll conclude with this. One of the world's largest crypto projects is run out of Princeton by a Pakistani American who actually was one of the first people in Pakistan to give a grant to the Lahore University of Management Sciences on Stacks is the name of that project, as part of a funding to a crypto research project, right? So Pakistani Americans are deeply involved in this sector, and I think this is a great opportunity for both countries and the diaspora, Pakistani American diaspora, to play a positive role in a sector that, has excited young people in Pakistan quite a lot.
Thank you, Uzair. And with that, we have reached the end of our session today. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you once again to our brilliant panel here for your time and your wonderful insights, and to all those who joined us for making this conversation all the more engaging with your questions. Please stay in touch with the Asia Society Policy Institute, sign up for our newsletters, and keep watching this space for more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.